Is Victoria Schofield. Victoria is a writer and commentator who has written extensively on South Asia. She is a renowned expert on the Kashmir issue. She is an associate of the Pakistan Security Research Unit in the University of Durham and a visiting lecturer at King's College. Over to you, Victoria.
Oops. Is it over to me? Can you all hear me? Okay, right. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to this very important session about my namesake, which is rather interesting. And I'm really delighted, actually, to be back here again in Karachi. It always gives me a lift when I step off the plane and when I smell the Karachi atmosphere and the flowers. And so thank you very much indeed to Oxford University Press and indeed to Amina Saeed for inviting me back. I'm really thrilled to be here. And I'm also thrilled to be here discussing Victoria and Abdul, which is the true story of the Queen's closest confidant. And I think it's absolutely amazing that we in Britain do not know very much about the Queen's closest confidant. We should say in her latter years, really between the last 2 decades of the 20th century. And I'm going to unusually start, instead of a question, to ask Shrabanu Banu, the authoress, to read an opening section to set the scene for us about Victoria and Abdul. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. Is this working? Yeah. Closer.
We need it closer.
Is that better? No. Ab theek kar dijiye ye? I have a soft voice, so I need a mic. Theek hai? Oh, sorry. Okay. Got to get this right. It's technology. Oh, I hear something. Is that better now? Okay, great. Well, it's lovely to be here in Karachi. So, what better than spending a Sunday morning here, right near the backwaters and this beautiful weather. I've come from London. It was freezing. So
yes, they were both very happy not to be in London.
This is just a treat. So thank you all for coming here, waking up early on a Sunday and coming to listen to this story. So I shall read a bit. This is a scene from... it's set in Osborne House, which was Queen Victoria's holiday retreat. And it's the beginning of the book. As the January mist enveloped Osborne House, a short line of mourners passed silently through the grounds towards Queen Victoria's private apartments. In the corridor outside her room, a tall Indian man stood alone. It was Abdul Karim, the Queen's Indian Munshi or teacher. He had been waiting there since morning, his eyes occasionally looking out across the garden where he had spent so many hours with the Queen. In the distance, the ships in the Solent bobbed silently, their flags at half-mast. The 81-year-old Victoria had died peacefully in her sleep. 3 days later, her family beside her. 3 days earlier, her family beside her. She was now dressed according to her wishes for this final journey to Windsor. The royal family had been summoned to say their last farewells. The Queen lay in her coffin, her face covered by her white wedding veil. She looked, as one witness described, like a lovely marble statue, no sign of illness or age, regal in death as she had been in life. A bunch of white lilies was placed in her hand. The procession filed past, her son and heir, Edward VII, and his wife, Queen Alexandra, the Queen's children and grandchildren, together with a collection of her most trusted servants and household members. Each stood for a few moments before the coffin of the woman who had ascended the throne at the age of 18 and proceeded to define an age. The king then allowed Abdul Karim to enter the Queen's bedroom. He would be the last person to see her body alone. The Munshi entered, his head bowed, dressed in a dark Indian tunic and turban. His presence filled the room. The king, knowing his mother's wishes, allowed him a few moments alone with her. The Munshi's face was a map of emotion as he gazed at his dead queen, her face lit by the softly glowing candles. She had given him, a humble servant, more than a decade of unquestioned love and respect. His thoughts raced through the years spent in her company, Their first meeting when he had stooped to kiss her feet at Windsor in the summer of 1887. The lazy days spent together as he taught her his language and described his country, the gossip and companionship they shared, her generosity to him, her loneliness that he understood. Above all, her stubborn defense of him at all times. He touched his hand to his heart and stood silently fighting back tears. His lips mouthed a silent prayer to Allah to rest her soul. After a final look and bow, he left the room slowly as two workmen closed and sealed the Queen's coffin behind him. At her funeral procession in Windsor, Abdul Karim walked with the principal mourners. The elderly Queen had given this instruction herself, despite what she knew would be intense opposition from her family and household. She had ensured her beloved Munshi would be written into the history books.
Thank you, Shramani. Well, there's so much of interest in that opening passage, which is why I wanted you to read it. And we're going to come back to these various points, which is the language, the Queen's loneliness, and indeed the establishment. But firstly, what I want to ask you is the extraordinary fact of you as an authoress writing a book, having the courage to write a book with the knowledge that actually you haven't got all your research material, and hoping that by publishing a book you would get more research material, which brought you for the first time to Karachi. So can you tell us about that, your own personal journey?
Mm-hmm. Well, when I started out, the first thing that I learned is that after Queen Victoria's death, which the bit you heard about, is her son came and destroyed all the letters. So I was starting out on a blank page. The letters had gone. But I worked in the archives in Windsor Castle. I read the journals. I read his diaries. The British Library. I had a lot of material, enough for a book, but there was one gap. I had found Abdul's grave. I had found his house in Agra, but I had not found Abdul's descendants. And they had left during partition. The trail had gone cold because he had no children. And that was one gap. I mean, I had read his letters, some of them. I had read his writings in Urdu in the Hindustani journals. But I wanted his voice. And I wanted to contact his descendants. So I went ahead. I published the book. And I knew that in the interviews I would do, I would be talking about the family. And every interview I did in the media, I kept saying, I'm looking for this family. And the very second city in Bangalore, I had a launch in Delhi and then Jaipur. And I came to Bangalore, and the British Council, Nick is here for the British Council, they called me and they said, there's a man here, and he says he's Abdul Karim's grandson. And I said, oh yeah, and I'm Winston Churchill. I'm sorry, that was the sort of instant reaction, because why in Bangalore? I was thinking I would find them in Delhi. I knew they were in Pakistan. I didn't expect them to be in the south. So anyway, I said, okay, tell him to come and see me. So then he came, and he came with a little briefcase full of photographs. He showed them to me, and they were of the family, which is lovely. But as a journalist, anyone can have photographs. I have to authenticate it. So I said, what more do we know? And he said his mother was alive. She's in her 80s, and she was Abdul Karim's nephew's daughter. So it was a direct connection. So then I said, okay, I want to meet her. I went to meet her. She was lovely. She had memories. She was blind, but she had memories, vivid memories of this house in Agra. She spoke about it, and she spoke with a perfect English accent. I couldn't believe it. It was amazing, because her father had gone to school, had accompanied Abdul Karim, and he'd been taught there. And he brought up his daughters very modern. They used to play tennis in short skirts. And she told me all this. It was amazing. And then they told me that the relatives in Karachi have a diary. And so there I was, as soon as I got back, got my visa, came here, and met the family, got this diary, which they hadn't looked at themselves for over 100 years. And it fell in my hand. It was like treasure, it was like gold. And I'm going to read one line that was in the diary, which I found so poignant. If you'll allow me, Victoria, one second.
Of course, yes.
This is, so this diary was really important because the royal household, wanted to suppress it. So I've seen the notes saying, oh, he's writing his memoirs and we must see they are not published. So it was very, so when this fell into my lap, and there's a line in it in which he writes, he ends his diary like this: I shall be well content if the perusal of this little work be attended with some interest or pleasure to the person into whose hands it may chance to fall. And that was me. So it was like I was finally bringing his voice out as well, something that they had tried to suppress, and it was very satisfying.
I think for a historian, that is the most wonderful thing. It's when it's like gold dust, you come across a particular treasure.
Absolutely.
And it also broadens and enhances the whole narrative, which is what we now have here. But you mentioned the date 1887, which is a very important date in Queen Victoria's history. It's her Jubilee date. So I wondered if you could tell us now just a bit about the background of Abdul Karim. We've just heard that he was the Queen's Munshi. He walked behind her coffin. But this is really a most extraordinary story, beginning in Agra. And how did Abdul Karim come to be the Queen's Munshi?
So Abdul Karim, he was a clerk in Agra jail. He was only 24 years old, and he was recruited because he was very good at his work, and he had sent some carpets and a bangle for an exhibition in England. And Queen Victoria, the superintendent of the jail, wanted to send Queen Victoria a Jubilee present. And he thought it would be very nice to wrap two very good-looking men in turbans and send them to her, to stand behind her, wait at table. I mean, when you're the Queen, you get a present like that. So no one's complaining. Anyway, so he was sent along with another servant.
Presumably he agreed to go.
Yes, he did.
Yes,
he did.
A new adventure. I was going to say we're not into the slave trade. I hope.
No. He was told, you'll go there. There was a little bit of misunderstanding. He thought he'd go as an equerry, and he thought, I'm going to be riding horses. He didn't know that he was going to be waiting at table. Anyway, so there's all this lost in translation. But he reached there. He and Muhammad Baksh, two of them were sent to Windsor. And their job was just to be decorative, really, wear these marvelous turbans and outfits. And they would represent the Queen's Indian Empire, these servants standing behind her and everything. So they were purely ornamental. But very quickly, from day one, she writes in her diary, the short, smiley one, and then she says, the fair, handsome Abdul Karim. So it's very obvious who has got the Queen's eye. And very quickly, she becomes, he wants to go back, and she says, no, don't go back. I want you to stay, and stay with me, and, well, there's more,
Yes, indeed, there's more. And I think, just pausing for a minute to think about that bit of history, it is part of history. The world has definitely moved on from being sent two ornamental servants to stand behind your chair. But if we can just divorce ourselves from what we now know about world's history, it's quite unusual what then did transpire. He caught the Queen's eye, but more than just liking the look of him, she, through him, wanted to learn about India, a place where she'd never visited, but was Empress of. And I think that's also a fundamental aspect of the story.
Absolutely.
That instead of keeping him just as a servant, she elevated him. He wanted to be not a servant, but she wanted to learn Hindi, Urdu, and tell us a little bit about the evenings they spent with her transcribing Urdu.
Absolutely. So Karim, actually, he crossed this, threshold, and he was like a complete natural. He was obviously very charming. He told her about Agra, his home city, the Taj Mahal, the romance. Queen Victoria was a romantic to the heart. She loved this story of, this tomb being built for this queen. It was just after her. She had built a tomb in Frogmore for her husband. So this really appealed to her. And he told her about the festivals, Holi, Diwali, his own festivals. So suddenly this, she could feel the heat and dust of India. It was coming to her. And she'd never traveled to India. She was the Empress of India, but the journey was too long. She longed to go there, but she couldn't. So Abdul Karim was bringing India to her. And then the next stage was she wanted to learn Hindustani. It's Urdu, they used to call it Hindustani. And she asks Karim to teach her which he does, and he does it very efficiently. Do you want me to just read a few phrases?
I think it would be nice to, yes, I think it would be, for those of us aspirant Urdu speakers, it's rather nice to think of the Queen
So one of the
struggling.
most amazing things was that very few people know that Queen Victoria could read and write Urdu. And with Abdul Karim, she learned to read and write Urdu and did this for 13 years. So I accessed her Hindustani journals in Windsor Castle, and nobody had opened this because nobody could understand the Urdu. I had it translated. And there was a little phrase book she used to carry with her all the time. It was a little red phrase book in which she's put everyday words like anyone, koi, animal, janwar, anger, khafa, etc. And then there's little phrases. So it's things like, you may go home if you like, orders for her servants. Tum ghar jao agar chahte ho. And then some funny ones. You will miss the Munshi very much. And he's dictated this to her, okay? It says, tum Munshi ko bahut yaad karoge. The funny ones also, tea is always bad at Osborne, poor lady. Chai Osborne mein hamesha kharab hai. Then the egg is not boiled enough. Anda theek se ubla nahi hai. Can you imagine the Queen sitting there and going, anda theek se ubla nahi hai to her Indian servants? And this is my favorite. Hold me tight. Humko mazboot thamo.
Yes, it's the most charming vignette. I mean, and most unusual. And as I say, for us in our British history books, it just doesn't feature. But now, we did also in the opening paragraph touch on the word loneliness. Mm-hmm. And as I say, it's nice to think of the Queen taking an interest in empire and India and learning Hindustani. Mm-hmm. But we're talking about the Queen in her late 60s, throughout her 70s, the decade of the 70s, mm-hmm.
having
a 24 to 30-year-old companion. Mm-hmm. She was very lonely at that time. Mm-hmm. Her consort, Prince Albert, had died in 1861.
Exactly.
And you mention a lot in the book the figure of John Brown, and you compare the Munshi, Abdul mm-hmm. Karim, with John Brown. So perhaps for the audience's benefit, you could fill us out a bit on what Abdul Karim meant following on from John Brown.
Right. So the Queen was, she'd chosen to wear black ever since her husband had died. So she was called the Widow of Windsor. She was a lonely figure. The servants and her court kept a distance from her. Her own children were very troublesome, and she had problems all the time with them. So she needed somebody who she could talk to as a human being. And this is what happened after her husband's death with John Brown. He was a Scottish gillie, which means, they look after the horses. And she became very close to him. He drew her out of mourning. And that relationship was quite significant, caused a huge controversy in the court. And some of you may have seen it was made into a film called Mrs. Brown, because that's what they used to call her, Mrs. Brown. Then John Brown died. He died in 1882, I think 4 years, 1884, sorry. And again, she was lonely. She said she couldn't stand, she couldn't sit. Her closest companion had died. And then 4 years later, when she's at the real height of loneliness, she's 68 years old, along comes Abdul Karim with his stories and his charm. And suddenly she is transported to another world. She is suddenly riding her Indian dream. She's learning Urdu. She's speaking to all the Indian royals who would come. She would show off. She would wear she loved bling. She'd wear her jewelry. Karim cooked her curries. He had a spice box which he'd taken. And she declared these are excellent. And she ordered that curries be cooked in the royal kitchens every day. And this is another thing we don't know, that every day she loved chicken curry and dal, and I've seen these menus in the
and she
royal
did love
household.
her food too, didn't she?
She loved her food, and she loved her Indian food. She said it's excellent, and so she set a trend actually. I mean, now we know that it's the favorite dish, etc., etc. But Queen Victoria started it way back there and made it fashionable.
I think we've also got to put this in context that it wasn't just sort of a hobby. She was having to deal with these Indian princes mm-hmm. who would come and visit, bedecked in their mm-hmm. clothes and jewelries, and so through Abdul Karim, mm-hmm. she became more authentic, and
Absolutely.
She learned a lot more about India.
She did.
And indeed, she learned about Indian politics.
She did. And in fact, one of the things she did was, I call this her, curry diplomacy is when the Emir of Afghanistan came visiting, and he couldn't eat because he couldn't get halal, cooked in a halal way in London. So he'd been starving for 3 days till he came to Osborne or Windsor. And there, the Indian chefs had prepared a full halal meal for him. And he was so delighted. He wrote about it, and he gave a present to Abdul Karim. And I call that a little bit of, curry diplomacy. Problems with Afghanistan existed even then, so nothing's changed.
Indeed.
But yes, she did get to know about about Indian politics through Abdul Karim, because he would tell her that there are riots in Agra. Religious riots, Hindu-Muslim riots, and she would write to the viceroy, why are these riots happening? What are we doing about it? And they happened during Muharram. She said, why can't we shift the Hindu festivals? They're always clashing. The poor viceroy, he writes back saying, it's like shifting Christmas, we can't do it. But she got totally involved, and she was a real letter writer. So she would write a letter, then she'd write a telegram, and the poor viceroy was inundated with all her, she wanted to know everything. And she had her opinion on everything as well. So, yeah.
Yes, so she wasn't just a sovereign without any views,
No.
indeed. But, and the big but is, of course, the establishment, as you also touched on, were not in favor of Abdul Karim for a number of reasons. And unlike John Brown, who remained a servant, he did become elevated.
Absolutely.
And so there was always this tussle, but she always stuck by him.
Oh, yes. She was a fiery woman. So the household hated Abdul Karim. Anyone who is a favorite, invites jealousy. This man is a favorite. And to top it all, he's an Indian. He's not even a prince. He hasn't got he hasn't got those 3-string pearls and every royalty with him. He's an ordinary man from Agra jail. He was a clerk in Agra jail. So that makes it double. So there's a class thing, there's the race thing, both happening, working against him.
In a class-ridden society, as Britain was then.
Absolutely. And so it's the household hate him, her own family hate him. Her son, he's the one who burnt the letters afterwards, and who becomes Edward VII. He absolutely hates the Munshi. And the whole household call it Munshi mania. They say the queen's lost her head over the Munshi. So they do everything they can to bring him down. And this is, try to make out he's a spy, try to do this, try to say he's stolen something. The works, but they can't get him. And then they try this final trick. And this is 97. It's the Diamond Jubilee year. And they want to, the Queen used to always take her Indians, and the Munshi obviously, on her holidays to Europe, south of France. And he was going to travel with her. And the household say, we don't want to travel with him. The hotel is small, we'll have to all have dinner together. And so they choose one of their representatives, and they say, look, you go to the Queen and you say, if she takes the Munshi, we're all going to resign. So this is like strike action planned. So the household, Mrs. Phipps goes and she tells the Queen is sitting there writing on her desk, which is cluttered with 100 things, photographs, diaries, memorabilia, ink pots. And she goes to her and she says, if you take the Munshi to France, we're all going to resign. And the Queen, she lets out a roar and she throws everything on her table. All the pots, ink, photographs go crashing down. And Mrs. Phipps, she just cries and she just leaves, runs from the room. And of course, that strike never happens. They all go to France. So it's like score. Munshi and the Queen,
Yes.
score 1-0, household 0. And that strike is put down. But they keep trying. They try every trick in the book to bring him down. But they can't. She stands by him. She sends memo after memo saying, you will be kind to the Munshi. You will respect him. She gives him houses, carriages, honors.
Yes. Well, and they do have to adhere to her wishes after her death.
Oh, yes.
Well, we've had a little chat, but I'm sure the audience would also like to participate and ask Shrabani some questions.
Sure.
And so, right, indeed.
Well, that's the diary I got where he writes his memoirs. He writes them between 1887 to 97, the 10 years between the Golden Jubilee and the Diamond Jubilee. That's the diary I have, yeah.
Yes. Yes, indeed.
How did you come upon this story?
Me?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I was one of my first books was a book on curry and how curry became popular. So I knew a little bit about Queen Victoria liking her curries. And I knew she had some Indian servants. But I think what made me really get into it was when a visit to Osborne House, where I saw these portraits of Abdul Karim. She has this Indian roommate there, an Indian darbar, with carvings and everything. And there's a portrait of Abdul Karim. And he's looking like a Nawab. He's standing there with a book. He's no servant, believe me. So I knew there's something. And then, I'm a journalist. You're always curious. I started researching, and then we have it. Yes.
Just wait for the mic. Thank you.
I guess Munshi Karim came back to India after Queen's death. Did he give his version of his relation in his diary or in his letter or anything else?
That's a good question, because he was, the moment she died, the funeral is over. That night, there's a knock on his door, early morning. It's like that midnight knock. And as he opens it, it's the Queen's daughter, Beatrice, standing there along with some tough security guards. And they burn all his letters, every letter from the Queen to him. And she used to write to him about 4 or 5 times a day. And the nephew, Ahmed Rashid, he brings them on a tray. Then they say, bring us more. By the end, they're burning postcards. And the whole family, the Munshi's wife, they're all crying over there. And they're saying, stop this. But anyway, they burn it. And then they send him back. So he's deported straight away. Brexit Britain. Yes. And, he goes back. And the thing is, he dies very quickly in Agra. And he was a young man, but he dies within 8 or 9 years.
Yes, he dies in 1909, doesn't he? And he doesn't ever have any children.
No, he doesn't have children. And to me, I think he died of, he was heartbroken. This man who'd been so close to the Queen, had cottages everywhere, had a cottage named in Balmoral after him. It's still there, called Karim Cottage. If you ever visit Scotland, go to Balmoral, you'll see Karim Cottage. This man was suddenly treated like a criminal. It would have broken his heart. And when he died, they had another raid on his house in Agra and burnt whatever was left. Anything that was left was also burnt. So the king, Edward VII, was obsessed with the Munshi. He really wanted to delete him from history. And, he couldn't really, could he?
Sad. We've got another question over there. Thank you. Yes. No, wait for the mic. Sorry, so we can all hear the question. Thank you. Okay, yeah.
Did you find any other primary sources that reference the letters? And can I ask your personal opinion of what you think, or your speculation of what was in those letters?
Right. What did I find? The primary sources were a lot of the letters that went between the Viceroy and the household, where they are just talking endlessly about the Munshi and the trouble he's causing in this household. And there's also the doctor's, her personal physician, and that was a major source for my book, was Sir James Reed. He kept a very detailed diary. So everything is in that diary. All this about the strike, and it's, what they did, the rooms, the favors he's given, when they go away to this cottage in Scotland, a remote cottage. It's all there in Reed's diaries. So that was a major source. Also, some of the letters, there were some letters in Windsor Castle. Somehow, some had survived. So actually, I saw them in Windsor Castle. And some Abdul had copied in this diary of his, this memoir that I found. So 1 or 2 letters, he had the content of those letters in these. He said, the Queen said to me, etc., and he has it. So, I could reconstruct quite a bit.
You have a question. Thank you. And then you, yes. Thank you.
Hello. I'm actually from London. I'm a writer.
Okay.
And strange enough, it's wonderful to meet you, because 2 years ago, actually, I wrote a play about Abdul Karim and Queen Victoria.
Really? Okay.
I did my research, as you did it in the British Library and in Windsor, and read your book as well. And strange enough, I met with my producers, and they said, oh, well, Queen Victoria and Abdul, well, nobody's really going to be interested in that, And strange enough, now it's a very big topic, and obviously the film is being released soon and everything. But what I found extraordinary about Abdul Karim and Victoria was that there was a very close relationship between the two. It was a maternal love that he had. She actually allowed him to bring his wife and his mother-in-law to come and live in the castle, and they have built their own house for him. And I just found that it is extraordinary that this woman, who we've all regarded in England as this staunch, hard woman, had an absolutely warm, melting heart for this Muslim man from India, basically.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. I mean, when I started out writing this book, Queen Victoria to me was this figure dressed in black, and whose most famous line was, "We are not amused." But of course, I found that no, she was very, she had a great sense of humor. She loved India. She loved Indians, and there was this really human side to her. So she really, for me, she changed. I learned about her as I wrote the book. And yes, I mean, it's extraordinary how close she got to Karim. I mean, I have these letters where she signed, your affectionate, your closest friend. And then she'll put little crosses there, So it's really cute. She'll describe herself sometimes as, your mother, but usually as your closest friend. And then she gives him advice. There's these letters which I call the Victoria sex manual. She's actually, they are so intimate that this is the Empress of India, and she's writing to him, and she says, why he didn't have children, so she wants to know what's wrong, and she's actually giving advice. There's. I mean, these letters are there. They're in Windsor Castle. I couldn't believe it. They've survived somehow. It shows how intimate they were, that this is the Queen and she's writing these letters to him. So
I mean, the tragedy is what we've missed. I mean, it would have been, it's a wonderful picture, but
of
it
course.
would have been a fuller picture. You have Sarah. Yes.
Hi. Fascinating stuff, I must say. I remember 4 years ago, I think it was, that British television did a documentary on Abdul Karim. Were you associated with that in any way?
Well, they used all my material and did not credit me.
Oh dear.
So I have an issue with that. But they were trying to get the option, but we'd given the option to the film company, working title. And so, anyway, long story. But they said, oh, well, we're going to do it anyway. So yeah, you do get people. They used every line from my book, every bit of research, with no credits.
And just one further thing, where is Abdul Karim's diary now? Which archive is it in?
No, it's with the family. It's part of the family. It's in Karachi. With the family, yeah.
Yes, interesting. Well, we're going to move on and talk about the film in a minute, but we have another question here.
Yeah,
yes.
It's it's wonderful
Use the mic.
to have heard you and to
Get the mic,
realize once again that love is the answer. It's the answer to a lot of divides, a lot of hatreds. And I would love to read your book, because if you must have written it the way that you speak, which is very, 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 very nice. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. It is about human relationships. At the end of the day, she was an empress and he was a clerk from Agra jail. But, they were two human beings, and that's it, really.
No, it's a wonderful vignette. Yes, we have another question
I think
here.
at the back.
And then at the back, yes. This lady here, yes.
Sorry, yeah.
There were rumors, they were all untrue, because when you said she was a mother to him, so there was nothing, everything was platonic.
Well, you see, it works at different levels. I mean, relationships work at different levels. Her own husband, when he died, she wrote, I've lost my closest friend, I've lost my husband, I've lost my friend, I've lost my mother, and I've lost my father. So, I mean, can you imagine? So I think all relationships work at a different level. Queen Victoria did like, I mean, the fact that she chose the tall, handsome one over the short, smiling one shows that she liked a strong, a tall man standing next to her, supporting her. She liked that. So there is the physical side. You can't deny that and say it's all just maternal. So there's a bond between them. There is a certain intimacy there.
Right.
But it works at different levels.
Right. Thank you.
Yes, you had a lady there.
Yeah.
My question is, did Queen Victoria learn Urdu from any other scholar as well?
No. Our scholar was Abdul Karim. And he wrote.
There's a rather charming passage in the book where he does go home on leave, and she's pretty upset because she feels her Urdu is going to be neglected. Her Urdu studies are going to be neglected. And I think what actually is fascinating is that it was a daily activity. It wasn't just you think of learning Urdu once a week. She had it
every day. She would never miss a lesson.
Extraordinary.
If they were on the ship traveling somewhere, she would have a lesson. At night, she would have it. When Abdul Karim was ill, the Queen packs the boxes, takes her stuff, goes to his house, props up his pillows, wipes his forehead, and takes her Urdu lesson. And the household say, my God, this is not on, this is the Queen. But she does it.
Yes, no, she's very strong. There's someone at the back and then you. Yes, yes thank you.
Hi.
Hello.
I was absolutely fascinated when I read your book a couple of years ago. I was wondering, my perspective was, of course, a post-colonial one, whereas we had been subjugated by the British empires. So we had a different take. Were we your primary audience, or it was the British? And if they were, what has happened since your book came out? Is there a revival of the view about Queen Victoria?
I didn't have an audience. I just found the story so fascinating. I rarely write with, am I targeting Indians or Brit? I mean, this is a shared story. So I was you do think it'll appeal to both sides, both India and Britain. This is about two people from, both these countries, and two important people. So for me, it wasn't the audience. I mean, I knew there'd be people interested. It was my fascination. And when you do a book like this, or any book, I mean, I spent 4 years researching it. If you are not passionate about the subject, you're not going to keep on trying to find material. So it's the passion that drives you to write a book.
Yes, they often say books choose authors. I think they do.
Possibly.
You have a question? Yes,
Yeah.
speak with the mic. Yeah, thank you. We just wait for the mic. Thank you.
I am in touch with them. They're in Bangalore, and they are in Karachi as well. Yeah. So thing is, I think the email was bouncing back, unfortunately. So I stayed with them the last time. Rizwana, Sartaj, yes. I mean, they love. I know. But you see her email bounce back. It's one of those things, and that's it. So
congratulations. I'll definitely read the book.
Oh, thank you.
I was brought in by some friend, not knowing where I'm going. So I'm very happy that I'm here in your
Well, and I mean, I think one of the things that you most all admire in the book, Shravani writes about the portrait. I mean, we're not talking about a small little portrait. It is an extraordinary tribute. And no wonder you got inspired to find more about him, because the portrait
He's holding
that was
this
painted
book
of him.
and looking. He looks like a Nawab and not a servant. So for me, that was very telling.
Yes. We have a question at the back. Thank you.
Was he financially better off than the others?
Oh yeah, she gave him land, a huge plot of land in Agra. So the poor viceroy said, "We've never given this to anybody who's just worked for a year in your, services." But the queen asks and the queen gets. So he got a lot of land in Agra. He was given cottages in England as well. So he had 3 cottages wherever he lived. She built a cottage for him in Scotland, which was Karim Cottage. Those, of course, he left behind. But he was given presents by everybody. She would get all the visiting European royalty, who were all her relatives, because, she married her daughters and sons and grandchildren to all the royalty all over Europe. So the Tsar of Russia and the Tsarina, they would come visiting Karim Cottage to have tea. And he gave her a tea set. And Karim would also give them presents, because I've seen those presents, And then he writes, "Thank you, Nick." And this is the Tsar. And then the Shah of Persia gave him a beautiful walking stick with beautiful gems on it. And there's so many presents he got. His house was like a museum. So yeah, he had money, but he died heartbroken. When he came back, it wasn't lack of money. And the sad thing is that I think Queen Victoria had a lease of her own life because of him. She had reached a stage where she might have just died in her 70s, but because Abdul Karim came into it and suddenly her life was so exciting again, she lived till 81. And
which for those days was quite
well, and amazing in those days.
Until our current queen, she was the longest serving.
As long as she had the first Diamond Jubilee. No, he was there for 13 years. Yeah. So 10 years of her life, I think, were extended because of Abdul Karim. But he came back and he died, so that was sad.
Yes.
Well, the family said that they have a few things, but not a lot. During partition, they left Agra, and there was a trunk full of many of his things, and that train was looted while coming, so they lost a lot of stuff.
Yes, that's.
But the diary survived. Those are the tragedies, but the diary survived, and I am so grateful for that. I'm so grateful to the person who carried it.
Yes, you have a question.
I have a question. I have a friend.
Yes, put the mic. Yes.
I have a friend
who several years ago did mention to us that she had a tea set which she inherited from her great-grandfather, who worked as a Munshi in the court of
Oh heavens! Maybe this is the missing tea set.
Well,
I
maybe
believe
this
that
is a tea set.
The tea set was sent to England for evaluation, and they did give the time frame.
What I
to be
heard
in the
is
time.
the Tsar's tea set was auctioned off in Sotheby's or something. So the family don't have it, but they think somebody gave it and it was auctioned off. I don't know. I mean, he has a large family here, so once I couldn't find them, and then they were just all coming out of the woodwork. I was being contacted, the extended family. They were all cousins, and they were all descendants of cousins.
Mentioned as a great-grandfather.
Yeah, you'll see in my book the acknowledgements. It's a whole paragraph of family. They were lovely. I mean, they were my hosts when I came to Karachi. They were very, very nice.
Yes, there's a question back here. Thank you. Oh, what a great session this is. This is so interesting, isn't it? I think we're all learning something.
Hi.
Yes, indeed.
I love you. I love how you speak, and I can't wait to read your book. I just had a question. I was curious.
Can you put the
that,
mic a bit
Closer. Hold it closer.
Is it fine now?
That's better. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. So my question is that you wrote the book first, and then you found the diary later, right? So I'm just curious that how accurate your facts and your interpretation of those facts were when you read the book.
No, it was. There was little gaps that were missing. So the diary filled those. So it's not like I didn't have the book. The book was out. It was a substantial book. There were little details that I could fill in, and for me, those little details always make a difference. The fact that he said, for me, one of the main things was that he wanted to go back. And that I didn't know. He was quite arrogant. He didn't like to be a menial servant and just stand there. He said, I've never waited at table. And so that letter was quite significant, that she begs him to stay. And he copies that. Apart from that, the wonder that he felt. And when I was writing the book, you have to get into a person's character and think. And I had also thought that, when he first comes and when he first goes to Scotland and he looks at the hills, and I knew he traveled in Kabul, and I felt he would be comparing hills and, the sort of scenery. And it's exactly what he did. I couldn't believe it. So when I saw it, he said, these remind me of Kabul. And I said, oh my God, I wrote that in the first edition, thinking he would be thinking this. And he was. So I had got under his skin, which is quite nice.
Yes, I mean, you do, there are certain times when you do get under his skin in turn, because by definition one doesn't have the material. How easy did you find that to sort of imagine his personality and his thoughts?
His personality was easy because there's so many descriptions of him, mostly people who hate him. The others are from the newspapers. For me, newspapers, I'm a journalist myself, so I go to newspapers a lot. And the newspapers would describe him, and they didn't hate him that much. So there was this very exotic descriptions of him in the Times. So I knew he's tall, I knew he had a soft voice. They describe him almost to the T. So I could... you write up a book, so I could use that colorful description to in my book as well to describe him. So that the description wasn't hard. It was some of the feelings he might have felt, and then when I had the diary, it was confirmed that he had felt exactly the same. So that was good. And I guess being an Indian, and how a 24-year-old would have felt when he's just gone there and he's suddenly in Wonderland, and that was easy. Harder was getting as a woman to get into a man's skin. I hadn't done that before, but that happened too. I saw it as this Indian young boy going out there, and
Got married during an association with her?
no, he was already married, and she invited his wife. It was a good Indian family. His father arrived, his mother-in-law arrived. They all arrived there, and his father was the first person who was allowed, and probably the only person allowed to smoke a hookah in Windsor Castle. I found that.
Yes, which is extraordinary. And one of the charming things I think about your book is that we do sense your own journey of discovery. It's not a sort of a distant book. You're very involved. So all of those of you who've read it or will be reading it, you can sort of sense you sitting in Windsor Castle looking out of the window, as you the story itself unfolds.
It was fun. I mean, in Agra, I had to find his grave. So apart from being a historian, I'm a journalist. I have to get to a place. I have to feel that place before I can write about it. So I didn't know how, nobody knew him in Agra. I just drawing a complete blank. Then I said, the only people who can help me are fellow journalists. So I contacted a journalist in the local newspaper, and I said, this is what I want to do, and can you help me? And let's go through all these graveyards in Agra and find this grave. Because I knew he was an important person. He's not going to just have an unmarked grave. It's going to be marked. And it was. You'll find the photo of the grave in my book. We went through the graveyards. 3 days in Agra, I found his grave. Even his family didn't know where he was buried. So I united his family in Bangalore with the grave, and now they look after it. So, well, he was buried when his family then, and the inscriptions. It's a little mausoleum. So you'll see it in the book.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Another question?
You mentioned about the burning of those photographs and other mementos.
Mm-hmm.
What was the background of that? Any sociological reason for?
Well, Edward VII was paranoid that about what would be revealed in it. So, and I can see why, because there's one letter that I discovered, which, it's the sort of thing that would have embarrassed him so much. It's a letter in which she writes a memo to her son and says, you will be courteous to the Munshi. It's in points. You will be respectful. You will do this. You will do this. And it's all about the Munshi. And then what does she do? She copies the Munshi in. So it's CC the Munshi. And, they're both there sharing this. And this is her son and, heir. So all these letters would have really embarrassed him. But somehow one or two survived. And there must have been so much more. And we could only imagine what there was in them.
Yes, I think it's a credit to Queen Victoria. As I say, it's very revelation of Queen Victoria, but we can't expect everyone to have been quite so enlightened as Queen Victoria was in terms. And unfortunately, the establishment, well, it's always like that. I mean, we have to fast forward to how the establishment treated Princess Diana. I mean, there is always a certain...
There's always.
That's nothing unusual. You have a question? Yes. Yes. No, we're going to in a minute. Yes. You have a question? Sorry. And then there's one over there. Yes. Two more. Yes. We still have time.
It's going to be a surprise
Mm-hmm.
that somebody of his family is here.
Oh, I'm so delighted. Okay.
I am his great-granddaughter.
Oh, welcome,
wonderful,
mashallah.
wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Munshi Abdul Rashid, who was his son, who studied in...
Nephew.
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 Well, he was sort of adopted.
Yes.
Son,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
Because Munshi Abdul Karim never had any kids, So my grandfather, my great grandfather was adopted by him, and he studied in Buckingham. So I came late. I didn't hear the whole thing, because I discovered late that there's a program today. So I'm really happy to hear that you went through looking into finding his grave and finding about the family. And I'm really happy about it.
Thank you for coming.
Wonderful.
It's lovely to have you
Thank
here.
you. Indeed. We have a couple of questions over here.
Yes, I was curious. When he was deported, was his entire family deported along with him?
Yes, and not just him and his family, all the Indian servants, because by then Queen Victoria had acquired a little coterie of Indian servants, and they were all sent back. And suddenly all this color in the court, it had gone.
So it was
no
a
more curries
Stalinist.
in the kitchen. It was a very cold place. And Lady Churchill writes about it. And in her, she was one of the ladies in waiting, and she says it's just lost its color. The court is a very cold place now.
So it was a general
with the
purge.
Indians causing mayhem as they do,
It's actually interesting because, again, our stereotypical view of Queen Victoria is the black and the dour.
Exactly.
But it was not like that.
It
became dour after she died.
Yeah.
And you also had a question?
You mentioned about the film coming in the making.
Yes.
Are you associated with that? And when do we expect that film to
I wanted Shribani to talk about the film, so let's talk about the film now. And who's starring in it?
Right.
Let's have a little preview for the film.
Okay, so this film is it's being directed by Stephen Frears. He's very, very good Oscar-nominated director. He made The Queen and Philomena and a whole lot of other films. My Beautiful Laundrette, which has a Pakistani theme as well. So he's directing the film, and it's being Who is playing Victoria is the big question, and it's Dame Judi Dench, no less. Yes. So yeah, we really have something to look forward to. And Abdul, of course. So our Abdul is being played by a Bollywood actor whose name is Ali Fazal. He's very good looking. So he really looks the part. I mean, I went for some of the shoots, and when he wears his turban, it's super. So I'm a consultant, so I had to look at various things. I mean, things I've never done before. It was great fun, like looking at the costumes of what they might have worn in the jail in Agra. Look, you know, so prisoners' costumes. I was sitting there in the British Library, the image section, just finding costumes, street scenes from Agra, because the art department wants things, the costume department needs things. So I was doing a lot of research on that. Plus, of course, advice with the script.
And when do we expect the film?
The film is being released September 22nd. I don't know the India dates and the Pakistan dates, and all this is not in my hands. This is with the producers. But yes, September, I think. Victoria and Abdul, yes. I would not let them change that. And I think it's a good title anyway.
No, I think it's good, the play on the A. And
with the
it's
V&A,
a tribute
yes.
to the fact that you, at that period, didn't find the interest. And now the interest is obviously there.
I think the extraordinary thing that will change, for especially people in Britain and Indians in Britain, who've always regarded the Queen Victoria as being this really doer and strong and how she melted with this man, how dear this relationship was. You have no idea how dear it was. She would break down in tears when he used to go away.
Yeah.
No,
it's a very endearing story. I mean, at the end of the day, it's also sad, but it's also very funny. I mean, the things that happened, it kept me amused the whole time as well. So.
And I think the release of the film, not that we wanted not to prevent people from reading the book, but also answers the question, the gentleman at the back, that who it's going to reach now. It will reach everybody. It will go into America as well, which will be very interesting. And for us in Britain. Yes, and no, I said not that it wants us to
Somebody was saying
there
are not that many copies in there.
Oh, thank goodness I've got mine.
Well, I think OUP would order them for you or something. I do hope you get to read it.
Yes.
Had I known all this beforehand, I would have brought some pictures, really good pictures of Munshi Abdul Karim in her chamber.
Okay. Yes, of course. Well, there are lots of pictures in the book, so you'll see the pictures in the book.
What made you so interested in going through all this? You went to Agra.
Well, once you start, and as I say, I'm a journalist, then I have to, until I've, nailed it, I've gone there, I found his house, I found his grave, and then I read everything in Windsor. They used to go away to this cottage in Scotland. It was a very remote cottage. They would go by carriage, and now you have to walk. So I walked to that place because I had to see that lonely cottage. And it's an 8-hour walk. So one Easter weekend we did it. We walked there. It's around a lake. But it's just fun. It was terrible weather. We had our sandwiches and our brollies, and we walked. But for me, it was important to do that. And it's part of the adventure, part of the whole thing. I think so. Yeah. So
Yes. Do we have any more questions? Yes, at the back. This lady at the back. Can we have a? We just hold on for the microphone. Thank you.
Right. I find it difficult to understand how Victoria, who was such a strong-minded woman, as I understand, and has been shown in a recent American TV serial, Victoria, where when she becomes Empress, how she dismisses all the stuffy people around her, and she zeroes in on Lord Melbourne, who becomes her advisor.
Who's a little bit too handsome in the film, I think. He looks a decade younger.
Yes.
So at age 23, 24, that's when she came to the throne, and she
18. She was 18.
Okay. So yes, 24 was Abdul. So how did she agree to having Abdul deported?
She was dead.
Oh, she was dead when
Yeah, that's when they sent him back. Oh, they wouldn't touch him while she was alive. She had his royal protector.
sorry, I didn't get
As
that
soon
part
as she
straight.
died, the day of the funeral, the next morning, they
You said
burned
so.
the letters and they sent him back. Yeah, they wasted no time.
But you said that her life was extended by 10 years because of Abdul, as
I
it
mean,
were.
this is me saying it, but I think she was such a lonely and so unhappy at that time. And, you know, suddenly there was excitement in her life. And that does prolong your life, doesn't it? So, yeah.
Okay, so that strength continued till the end.
Yeah. She died in 1901.
Yes,
so
at 81, which for somebody of
for
that,
those,
for those days
was amazing.
quite elderly.
Yeah.
Which is good.
Mhm.
Do we have any more questions? Yes, there's one here. We've still got a bit
Do
of
we
time.
have time?
We've got
Time's
up. One more
Okay,
question.
one last
and then a
question. You
little
better make
thank
it
you.
good.
Thank you. I think we've...
Yeah.
Can I ask in Urdu?
हाँ सर, I'll try. Yeah.
क्या मुंशी ने क्वीन विक्टोरिया को उस जमाने के मुसलमानों की फ्लाइट में बारे में कुछ बताया था?
हाँ, ज़रूर
जो कि
बताया
हम
था।
पाकिस्तानी यहाँ पे पढ़ते रहते कि हम उस जमाने में बहुत
हाँ,
तकलीफ में
ज़रूर बताया था. And she writes about it. She asked the viceroy कि ये क्यों and she says one very significant thing कहती है. She says Muslims are our most loyal subjects. And she says this, and then they come back to her and they said, don't you know they had the mutiny? You see, after the mutiny, you know, they sort of, the Muslims, they thought they identified the Muslims with Bahadur Shah Zafar, and so they had come down in there. They were favoring the Hindus, the British, so the administration. And she says, they are our most loyal subjects. And she keeps asking her.
Well, thank you very much, Shrabanu Basu. I think we've had an absolutely fascinating...
Sorry, this seems to be...
Oh, one more. Are we allowed one
Okay.
more question? Right,
Okay.
indeed.
Thank you very much for your very nice talk. I would like to ask that the British intelligence was playing a very significant role in the life of Princess Diana and the gentleman from Egypt. So in this film which is being made on the life of Queen Victoria and Karim, would this aspect of the relationship would be reflected, the role of the intelligence in the royal family?
Well, there's a bit about the intelligence in my book, but I don't know if it's going to be there in the film. If you read my book, I write about how they go and they spy on Abdul just to nail him as a spy. You know, they think he might be up to no good and as a spy, so they follow him all over India. And they report back to him. But Abdul is always ahead of them, and they find nothing. So that bit is there in my book. There are notes from the Thuggy society, no less, following Abdul. But I don't know if it'll come in the film. A film is a different medium altogether. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much again, Shrabanu. Fascinating hour. Thank you all for coming and
Thank you.
participating so well. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you for attending this session. Our next session is titled Novel or Nisai Shaur, which will begin at 12:15 p.m.
Kept it going.
Thank you.